Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Mr. V again. And this is episode 2, so you know the score. To participate in Coffee with Mr. V, you need to go and grab yourself a cup of coffee or whatever liquid you fancy. Go and put it in a cup or mug or glass or whatever you fancy. And then with me, we're going to do a synchronized sip, and that's going to be the best part of your day. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. I love coffee. So today we're going to look at long run cost curves. The last episode, it was short run cost curves. And remember, the short run we identified as being a period of time, a hypothetical period of time. It's not a week, it's not a month. It's a hypothetical period of time in which at least one factor of production is fixed. And I used my example of Kate's Pizza Shop here, where we had fixed capital, the ovens at the back, and also this fixed worktop area here. There's fixed land because I'm not expanding the land available. But what we did do is we talked about increasing the units of labor. That was our variable factor of production. Well, the long run then is defined as being this period of time in which all factors of production are variable. So we don't have a constraining factor anymore. In the short run, we could add labor, but we were constrained by the size of the pizza shop. In the long run, all factors of production are variable. So I don't have to just worry about increasing the number of staff. What I could do is actually double the size of Kate's Pizza Shop. So for example, I could bolt these people on as well. And instead of just having a division of labor production process with 4 members of staff, as you can see here, suddenly I've got a whole load of new staff going all the way going up to 8. And now we should be able to increase our output quite substantially. Remember, last episode, we said that one of the problems of operating in the short run is that when you're trying to meet increases in demand, an increase in output, very quickly you'll experience the law of diminishing marginal returns because of the constraining factor. If you're operating in the long run, though, you're not constrained by anything. You're not constrained by the size of the worktop because you can double the size of the worktop, or you could triple it or quadruple it. You're also not constrained by the number of capital goods. The capital goods, remember, were these kind of pizza ovens. Well, in fact, I could substitute my tiny pizza oven and I could put in these massive pizza ovens at the back. So in fact, I've got 2 of these, and I'm going to take out the small ovens and I'm going to put the big pizza ovens in at the back as well. I don't know how well you can see those ovens, but basically they're a lot bigger than last ones. You can fit a lot more pizzas in. So the idea is now that I can increase output a hell of a lot more, and I don't have the constraining factors that I did have in the short run. Now, how does this manifest itself in a diagram? Well, what we really need to consider then is, because there's no way of kind of looking at the production process in the long run with all the infinite possibilities of factors of production. And what I mean by that is, well, am I talking about a factory that's twice as big with just 1 pizza oven, or with 2 pizza ovens, or 3 pizza ovens, or with 6 members of staff, or with 5 units of staff, or however many? There are so many infinite variables of how many factors of production that I could have, that actually what we do as an economist is we take a snapshot in time. All right, we take a snapshot of time, Kate's Pizza Shop when she was small. And what we said was, when Kate's Pizza Shop was small, is that she was constrained by the law of diminishing marginal returns, and therefore she had a Nike swoosh shaped marginal cost curve and a smiley face average cost curve. And if you want to remind yourself why they look like that, go back to episode 1 and have a look, okay? But I put it up here because Kate's Pizza Shop at the moment is very small, and therefore she can't really produce much output, and the cost of production are relatively high, okay? What happens then when she increases the size of her? Sorry, I'm just trying to angle that as well as you can perhaps make it out to be. What happens then is when she increases the size of the pizza shop is that she's able to make a lot more output. And the key thing about the long run is she can also decrease unit costs of production. This is a concept called economies of scale. Economies of scale say, when you increase the scale or the size of a firm, unit costs will fall. We can represent this by saying, now at this size, this marginal cost and this average cost curve will actually come downwards and to the right and will reappear here. So this is Kate's Pizza Shop, which is small. So just excuse me for a minute. I'm going to write in AC small, MC, and then MC and AC medium. Okay. And if we were to do this again, all right, if I was to increase Kate's Pizza Shop again by another length of worktop and another big pizza oven and another load of staff, actually what we'd find is this would go even further to the right and even further down. And this is, as I say, the principal economies of scale. So where are these unit cost savings coming from? What are these economies of scale? Why is Kate finding it cheaper to make pizzas now than she could do before? Well, if you go into your notes, I'm sure you'll have a list of notes of where these economies of scale could come from. Once you're a bigger firm, there's all sorts of cost savings you can tap into. So, for example, the most obvious one is bulk buying. Bulk buying is this idea that if we buy lots of raw ingredients, the dough to make the pizzas, the tomatoes to put on the topping, the cheese, the mozzarella, then we can probably get a discount from our suppliers because they'll be more willing to sell it us at a discounted rate because of the amount that we're buying. So there's one cost saving. Another cost saving is simply what we talked about earlier, this idea of division of labor. When you only had 2 members of staff before, they were running around trying to do lots of all the work themselves and probably not making a very good job of it. Okay, once you now have more staff, you can have the division of labor and you can become experts in the thing that you're being asked to make. So this guy is an expert pizza base maker. This person is an excellent tomato topper. And maybe this analogy doesn't work brilliantly for a pizza shop, but you could see where it might come in for something like a car manufacturer. So if one person was trying to make a car, I mean, I would back myself to have a fairly good go at making a car, but I'm not an expert in any of the particular areas. But on the other hand, I could be trained to be an expert in one particular area, and this person could be trained to be an expert in another particular area. And once you've got a whole production line, the whole thing becomes more efficient, and therefore the unit cost will start to fall. Other economies of scale might be financial economies. So when businesses go to the bank and ask for a bank loan, again, who's going to get the bank loan? Mr. Tesco or the local bakery around the corner? Probably always going to be Mr. Tesco. All right, he's got far more assets that he can use as collateral. The bank is much more willing to give him a loan because he's much more likely to pay his debt back. So not only will he get the loan, but he'll also get it at a much cheaper rate than he did before. Advertising and marketing economies of scale. Basically, we've got the same advertising budget for Kate's Pizza Shop, but it's now spread out amongst a much larger, many more units of output. So the average cost of marketing per unit of output actually falls. And there's another one. Think about this capital good that we were talking about here, the machine, okay, the pizza oven. It's 8 times as large as the previous pizza oven, but it didn't cost 8 times as much more. Maybe we actually only paid twice as much, maybe 3 times as much, but it doesn't really matter because we're getting 8 times the productivity with only 3 times the cost. So therefore you can see how unit costs are going down there by using automated, more productive machinery as well, which you can only do as a bigger firm. Coming back to this diagram then, you can see that as we try and increase output, and the only way that we've increased output, by the way, is increasing the factors of production that we had, doubling the size of the pizza shop, improving the size of our machines, increasing the labor. We have moved along the x-axis, and come down the y-axis, the cost curves. What we do then to derive the long-run average cost curve, since these are all possible at any given scale of the firm, okay, and I've only chosen 3 here, but hypothetically there could be thousands of different possible scales of the firm. What we can do is a mathematical term is that we can draw a locus, and a locus is a line that's drawn tangential to other lines, and in this case I'm making sure that it is a tangent to all the possible short-run average cost curves that Kate's Pizza Shop could achieve. As I say, I've only done small, medium and large, but equally we could have, you know, Kate's Pizza Shop here, 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 all the way along. Now the diagram starts to look a bit, you know, hairy at that point. So we prefer just to talk about 1 or 2 short run average cost curves. But the long run is derived from a line that is tangential to all the different short-run average cost curves that are possible. And that's how we derive the long-run average cost curve. Why is the long-run average cost curve useful? Well, when you start doing your essays about why different market structures are better than others, firms that are allowed to increase in size, possibly because they have abnormal profit and they can reinvest it in the size, you can talk about them shifting along their long-run average cost curve, going from A to B. That's good because costs go down, which means prices potentially to consumers also go down, so consumer surplus increases. So this is potentially very good for the consumer. It might not be if it's a monopoly, because monopolies might keep the prices high, but we'll save that discussion for when we talk about market structures and the costs and benefits of each one. Okay, my own personal pet hate with the long run is is when students define economies of scale as increasing output leading to decreasing unit costs. That's not necessarily the economy of scale. Watch this. It is possible to increase output and decrease unit costs by going from there to there just in the short run. That's increasing the efficiency of your production process in the short run. That's not an economy of scale. An economy of scale is when you fundamentally change the scale of the firm. Okay, you've changed the factors of production, changed them in size, you've grown in size, and you've moved down the long run average cost curve. Until that point, it's not an economy of scale. It's just more efficiency of the production process. Where do students often go wrong with economies of scale? They talk about them very generically. So if you have an exam question about an airline, make sure that you're talking about bulk buying in terms of airlines, jet fuel, food that you might serve on the aircraft, or financial economies of scale that airlines themselves might tap into, or the size of aircraft. You know, a plane might be twice as big, but only cost 1.5 times as much. There's a unit cost saving there. On the other hand, if it's a chocolate manufacturer, don't talk to me about jet fuel. Talk to me about the raw materials that go into making chocolate. Okay. AO2 is very important when it comes to both IB and A-level economics, okay, because it separates those people who can remember generic notes from those people who can actually apply economic concepts to a new case study that they've got in the data response questions. So make sure that you're doing that. Again, you're probably already aware about this, but just to confirm, anything up until that point there, and I'm calling it that point there because I think on my diagram that is the minimum point. That is an economy of scale. It's an internal economy of scale. It's an economy of scale that's happening through internal growth. Once you get beyond that point, and that point, by the way, is called the minimum efficient scale. I've always found that very counterintuitive, minimum efficient scale, because it's the smallest scale that the firm needs to be to exhaust all of its economies of scale. Now, we think about it being big. It is big, but it's also the minimum size that it needs to be to get rid of all of its economies of scale. You can see that there are no more economies of scale from this point onwards. The unit costs don't go any lower than this. Once you get beyond that point, that's diseconomies of scale. This is the idea now that if the firm continues to grow, that its unit costs will start to rise. And there's all sorts of reasons why that might happen. Again, you should have a list of notes here. But quite often the key examples are problems with coordination, problems with communication. So therefore, the business strategy doesn't get downloaded to the staff on the ground, on the shop floor, on the factory floor, wherever it might be. They don't necessarily get the decisions, a flow of decisions correctly from the top. So there might be things like duplication of effort. There might be people aiming to do a new line of a particular product, but actually that's not what the boss wanted. The boss wanted something else, okay? I personally like two other particular good diseconomies of scale. So one is when a firm is large enough, it comes in the public eye a lot more, which means it's not as easy to dump your paint in the river, okay? Because Greenpeace are gonna find you. The regulator of the industry is gonna find you. So actually you dispose of it more sensibly, but that's more expensively. Okay, the other one is self-cannibalization. This is the idea that a firm might end up producing a second product that actually ends up only being in competition with itself. And a good example of that for me was when Coca-Cola released Coca-Cola Light, or was it Coca-Cola Life fairly recently? It was a green tin of Coca-Cola. And I always thought, well, who's buying this? The only people that are buying this were people who were buying red, normal Coca-Cola before, and they're switching to green Coke. It hasn't really increased Coke's market share. They've probably put an awful lot of effort into this, a lot of time, a lot of research and development, but they're not getting any more sales. They're just removing demand from one of their own products to another product. And car manufacturers find the same thing. So they might bring out 2 economy lines or 2 luxury lines, and actually all they find is they're in competition with themselves. So I'm going to end it there. That's long run cost curves done, the long run cost curve there. And just remember, you can please ask me questions, put them in the comments below, and then in the next episode, I'll come back to your comments and try and answer your questions. With that in mind, there are 2 outstanding questions from the stuff I did yesterday on short run cost curves. So I'm going to have another quick cup of coffee. So some really good questions. The first question came in why the Nike swoosh of the MC curve? You know, why is it actually decreasing here? Because we talk about the law of diminishing marginal returns, LODMR, okay, but actually what's happening here is the costs are decreasing. So presumably you've got increasing diminishing marginal returns. Yeah, you do. That's exactly what's happening. Going back to Kate's Pizza Shop then, with just Kate. Kate at the moment on her own is doing everything. She's making the base, she's doing the topping, she's putting it in the pizza, she's answering the phone, trying to take the order. So yeah, it's pretty hard work for Kate. As soon as she gets a second member of staff, suddenly the whole production process becomes slightly more efficient than before, because now there's slight division of labor, they can break up the tasks and they can be more efficient. In fact, it might be that 3 is a more optimal number, that they can break down the tasks even more efficiently, and actually the production process is at its most efficient at this point. So what we've done here is we've come down here, and now we're probably at the point where if we added a 4th member of staff, now this is where the factory space is becoming a constraint. And actually we're going to see, although total output will increase, it will increase at a diminishing rate. And that's where we get the law of diminishing marginal returns happening and increasing marginal costs. So just to confirm then, yes, you will get increasing marginal returns at very low levels of labor. But once you hit a certain number, and that will be different for different firms, depending on the industry that they're in. Once you hit a certain number of labor, that's when the law of diminishing marginal returns will kick in. And that's when you get the upward sloping marginal cost curve. The second question that came in was talking about fixed and variable costs, because I said in episode 1 that the marginal cost curve only takes into account variable costs. That's true. So the question is, what should I do with the marginal cost curve if fixed costs rise? Well, the answer is absolutely nothing. If fixed costs rise, if the cost of running Kate's Pizza Shop in terms of the utility bills, in terms of the interest repayments that are due on any loans that she might have start to rise, this has no bearing whatsoever on marginal costs, because it doesn't affect the cost of each additional pizza. The only thing that affects the cost of each additional pizza is the variable costs that go into making those pizzas. So the cost of the raw ingredients, the cost of potentially employing another member of staff to make that many pizzas. It's only the costs associated with increasing output. So the marginal cost doesn't change. But if there is an increase to fixed costs, I would expect you to move the average cost curve upwards, because average cost curve does take into account fixed costs. Remember, we derived the average cost curve from looking at average fixed costs and average variable costs. If fixed costs rise, average fixed costs rise, therefore average costs should rise. I've shifted it upwards, parallel shift, and I'm making sure that that minimum point is always intersecting with the marginal cost curve, because that's the mathematical rule. So there you go. That is the relationship between fixed costs, marginal costs, and average costs. And that's it. As I say, please ask questions about long run cost curves, and I will get back to you in episode 3. Stay safe and take care of yourselves.